and give feedback. Right, so let me introduce our speaker. Snobra Rizvan works as an assistant professor at the Department of English at Bahauddin Zakariya University in Multan, Pakistan. And she is currently also a research fellow at the University of Vienna in Austria. Her research interests are in critical theory and textual analysis, focusing mainly on gender, culture, religion, and media. She holds a PhD from the University of Graz in Austria. And she has published several articles in different journals, for example, in Text and Talk and in the Journal of Language and Politics. Today, she will give a presentation on mapping decolonial trajectories, a masculinist reading of non-hegemonic men in Indo-Pakistani fiction. And with this, I hand over to Snobra. Snobra, if you have a PowerPoint presentation,
yes, I have. Yes, I have. Yes,
you should be able to activate it now.
Share screen.
Yes, share screen.
Yes. Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure being with you all today. So, as you know, this is topic of my presentation. And I'm going to start it now. And let's move to my very first slide. And here, yeah, next. So first of all, I would talk about what this talk is about and its focus, and what works of fiction have been selected to discuss this topic. So I would like to say in this presentation, the transnational articulations of the expansive side of decolonial studies in relation to representation of masculinities in the selected Anglophone fiction are considered. This interconnecting line of reflection crosses over disciplinary borders and lead to the gender trajectories of decolonial theorization. It is within these interstitial transnational sites, I intend to discuss the colonial trajectories of South Asian men and masculinities in three works of fiction. First of them is Mohsin Hamid's The Reluctant Fundamentalist, which came out in 2007, and then Kiran Desai's The Inheritance of Loss, and third one is Arvind Adija's The White Tiger. And in all three of three novels, actually male characters dominate, and women characters, they are, I mean, not many, I mean, maybe only one or two, and they do not dominate the narrative. So in the selected Anglophone fiction, reader can observe temporal and spatial masculinities involved in the political mobilization and transformational politics. The reader can observe to what extent the sigh of global power, such as I'm sorry, phone actually rang and I didn't actually turn it off. And the reader can observe to what extent loci of global power such as heteropatriarchy, Islamophobia, and racism can work to propel people towards decoloniality. When the process of decoloniality starts, multiple loci of enunciation emerge, alluding to the myriad of orientations of solidarity and its extensive conceptual potentialities. In the selected works of fiction, it can be observed that the male characters of these novels undergo a process of self-reflection. At first, they are unable to see their status and position because their own Eurocentric view naturalizes their subordination and their inferior status. So in the first novel, Hamid, there's only one, mention the characters which worth mentioning, that is Changes. This is the kind of a monologue, and we just keep on listening to Changes. He is talking to an American, and just he just keeps on talking, and we just listen to him, and his voice is there. In third novel, it is the same kind of narrative, where a character whose name is Balram Halwai. He's a driver, and he is also talking, he's writing letters to Chinese Prime Minister. and we just keep on listening to his voice, and he's only one dominant male character in this novel. And the third one that Kiran decides, it is actually quite complex novel. Though Sai is the main, kind of person who she is a girl, and we see things from her perspective, but she is not a dominant character in the novel. Actually, dominant characters of the novel are men. One of them is Judge Patel, who is grandfather of Sai, and then her boyfriend, his name is Gayan, then Judge Spook and his son Gayan. And these four are actually main characters who are who are very important and significant and noticeable in the narrative. Though this novel was written by a woman, but still these are male characters who dominate this novel's narrative. So now first, let's discuss form and content of these novels. First of all, the first point is variation in the portrayal of decolonial trajectories. In these works of fiction, we observe variation in the portrayal of decolonial trajectories of South Asian men. So Biju, who is from Kiran Desai's novel, and he is a boy who goes to America with big dreams, but he fails. And his journey is altogether different from Changes, who is a character from Muhsin Hamid's novel, and Balram, who is a taxi driver. Same is the case with Judge Patel, Mr. Bose, who is a friend to Mr. Patel, and Gayan, all others who have their dilemma to deal with and their own fears and conflicts to tackle with. All these novels are dominated by men who are visibly caught in colonial matrix of power. So this term has been taken from, Nolan Walsh's book, and they themselves have actually borrowed this term. And so this was originally not, created by them. So the Latin Fundamentalist and the White Tiger are written by male authors who write from a male perspective. Both the novels present first-person narrative where a man is talking to another man. At times, these two novels become an interior monologue where we hear male voice. Kiran Desai's The Inheritance of Loss is written with different stylistic techniques. Being an omniscient narrator, she presents a diversity of characters. Even her story is dominated by male characters. We see at least four techniques. Being an omniscient narrator, she presents a We see at least four very significant, remarkable male characters: Judge Patel, Biju, Gayan, and Cook, as I had told earlier. Female characters are there. Sai, who is Judge Patel's granddaughter, but she is the only one noticeworthy, a female character. But she does not dominate the narrative, and same is the case with other novels where female characters are there, but their characters are not that much, dominate the narrative. Next point is Kimmel's homosocial enactment of masculinity. Kimmel's homosexual enactment of masculinity is true for these male characters because their dilemmas, traumas, fears, or on colonial metrics of power, which include racism, sexism, and nature, are only related to other men and are addressed by other men. They feel subordinated and dominated by men only and want to exert hegemonic masculinity to impress other men only. All these characters in colonial matrix of power exhibit transitional masculinities. In one spatio-temporal domain, they may possess some of the characteristics of hegemonic or dominating or most desired form of masculinity, and at others, they are hegemonized, dominated, and subordinated to other men, who they idealize and are awed by them. For example, Balram in his rural setting is dominant, admired, and followed by men from other lower hierarchies. I'm using Cornell and Messerschmitt's term, lower hierarchy. And here he is subordinate to Ashok due to his status in the society. He admires Ashok and even addresses him as his ex at one point on the novel. Same can be applied to Judge Patel and Changes, who portray transitioning masculinities. In England, Judge Patel is inferior, subordinated to white men. He starts imitating Englishmen, which reminds us Homi Bhabha's ideas of mimicry. In India, he is successful, rich, and influential, and dominates and even humiliates subordinate men like Cook. Similarly, Changes, despite being successful and privileged in America, felt he is never considered an equal, and this makes him this reluctant fundamentalist, who is surprised to see that September the 11th attack actually gave him a kind of a satisfaction and peace. Then there, I would like to mention a point that's a creature masculine. As I mentioned earlier, the white tiger and the reluctant fundamentalist exhibit a male South Asian world from the perspective of South Asian men. The style of the writing has been mentioned earlier. Here, I would like to add that both of these novels can be called a creature masculine or men's writing, the style which stands in contrast with the idea of a creature feminine and women's writings. Some of the qualities of these writers are male-centered worldview, and they are addressed to men, and at times they have aggressive and violent themes and content. And then there's the idea of rugged individualism in these novels, and there are more action than reflection in these novels. This idea of a creature masculine needs to be developed more, and not all male writers write in this style. Today, my talk is not focused on it, so I will move ahead towards my next point. Now, this is the title of Kiran Desai's novel, The Inheritance of Loss. And we can see actually the man is there in the center. I mean, man is there, and it's obvious that this novel is about men and their journey and their trajectories. And then here, when the elected fundamentalists, on our left side, left side, we see movie poster because its novel has been adapted for a film. And you can see only men dominate the movie. And here on the other side, you can see the title of the book. And here, The White Tiger. This is the third novel that I have selected. And on my left side, we can see, right side, I mean, the title of the book, and left, The White Tiger, where the poster of the movie. Though a woman is shown in the movie, but actually her character was, very short. And she has an important role, but it was very short appearance she had in this particular movie. So actually the movie is about the relationship between Ashok and his boss, Mr. Ashok, who is standing behind him. And basically the story revolves around the relationship between these two men. And the same idea of Kimmel, homosocial enactment of masculinity, is very much observable there in this particular film and look at the sports book. So now the idea of decoloniality, and we know this slide is about this. So as we have just seen the pictures and posters of these three, books and their films and their posters. And in my opinion, the Inheritance of Laws is philosophically more complex and intriguing than The White Tiger and The Reluctant Fundamentalists. Judge Patel trajectory is unique. Instead of decoloniality, it looks more a trajectory of coloniality. Instead of resistance to colonial metrics of power, which is modernity and coloniality according to Mignolo and Walsh, he goes for mimicry and enacts coloniality himself. He acts and lives exactly like an Englishman. He is well aware of his insignificance and is unable to get free from the psychological impact of coloniality. He remains hegemonized throughout despite this outward enactment of coloniality and dominance. In contrast, Biju, who is Judge's cook's son and who goes to America for a better life, makes a concrete effort to break free from the hegemony of the coloniality. After realizing his whole effort to be financially empowered by immigration to America are futile, he decides to go back to America. The Reluctant Fundamentalist is the story of a Pakistani man who is very bright and successful and works at USA. He silently struggles, resists, and refuses to submit to ongoing relations and patterns of power established by his external and internal colonization. His trajectory of decoloniality starts from the very first time he arrived in America and moves from his earlier fascination towards disillusionment and culminates with his eventual return to Pakistan. Balram, the driver, his trajectory is also very unique. He kills his boss Ashok and is a successful entrepreneur at the end of the novel. It confirms that once someone is caught in the colonial matrix of power, there is no outside of it. Balram has changed his fortune, but he is still inside the same colonial matrix of power. He is ready to kill Dharam too. Dharam is young cousin who was sent to him by his family to be a driver of a rich man like Ashok himself. He believes that, Balram believes that if need arises, he can also kill Dharam, who is young cousin of himself. So this is how he's caught in this kind of matrix of power where he will sacrifice any relationship to remain at the top. Now in this slide that's in front of us here, some ideas about decoloniality by Walsh and Mignolo have been given. If we read these quotes, we can just realize that it is not very easy to actually define decoloniality, what it is, because they write about what it is, what decoloniality could be, what it is not, and how people can be involved in it, but how could it actually be defined? They do not really tell us. So we can see it is not easy to say what process of decoloniality is. Finally, the most important point raised by them is the process of decoloniality requires epistemic disobedience to confront colonial metrics of power. Decoloniality is a broader process which involves the struggle and resistance of whole groups, communities, and nations, which is relational and contextual. Donald Walsh further said there is no outside of the metrics of power, and it is hard to find a location to confront it. So here they mentioned the name of Annibal Pugliano. He actually gave this term of the coloniality of power, and Mignolo and Walsh they have taken this term from him, and they used it in their book multiple times and based their ideas of decoloniality actually borrowing some ideas from Annibal Pugliano. So here, what about this study? Because here we are faced with the personal issues of the people. So the same slogans which are raised by feminists is there, personal is political. So despite the fact that decoloniality must be related to national and transnational contexts, but there are some structural patterns and which make even personal things very much political. This study takes a different approach because it is concerned with the decolonial trajectories in the personal space. Feminist slogan, personal is political, is valid in this context too. So journey of all the characters mentioned above may be personal, but it reveals larger structures and patterns. These structures coming from different contexts face different modes of oppression in their respective matrix of power and resort to different coping mechanisms. Changes represents situation of Muslims in the US in post 9/11 scenario. Judge Patel represents an Indian colonial subject in post-colonial scenario. Biju represents poor Indian immigrants who travel to the US for a better life. Gayan is a young man dislocated from Nepal, but that makes him very ambivalent. Having said all this slides presents a definition of decoloniality, which encompasses what ideas about decoloniality have been adapted to analyze male characters in this study. So this study takes decoloniality as a process of identification of one's place in a colonial, post-colonial, and colonial setting or colonial matrix of power, where a colonized subordinate individuals see through discursive and non-discursive practices which work to reduce them to subordinate status and do acts to redefine themselves and reshape their identity. So here some other quotes about some definition of hegemonic and non-hegemonic definitions have been given. Basically, the hegemonic definition, it is defined, which is defined here, but it cannot be understood without an understanding of non-hegemonic masculinity. So this study goes by the same definitions of hegemonic masculinity as have been mentioned there in the slides. The term hegemonic masculinity cannot be understood unless it is contrasted and compared with non-hegemonic or subordinate forms of masculinity. When characters from the selected novels who exhibit marginalized or subordinate masculinities in one way or another embark on the journey of decoloniality, they have to disentangle themselves from multiple offshoots of colonialism, such as capitalism, heteropatriarchy, racism, geographical, and other orders. In the process, they exhibit transitional masculinities, which break away from the historical ones. Now here in slide 11, there's a quote from Connell and Messerschmitt. Connell and Messerschmitt argue how older forms of masculinity may be replaced by new ones. In 1980s and 90s, the idea of new man was also popularized, which has been discussed by Sean Penn in his article in Stuart Hall's Representation. Sean Penn showed media representation of young men exhibiting nurturing and motherly qualities, as well as physical fitness with muscled bodies, So Cornell and Messerschmitt are hopeful the process of transition may lead us towards an evolution of gender hierarchies. For example, Judge Patel's motherliness for his dog Mutt and Balram's for his cousin Dharam, though both of them altogether different and cannot be compared. And they were very, very ambivalent. Like, Judge Patel, he didn't love anybody other than his dog Mutt, and Balram, though he showed some soft heart and soft corner for Dharam, but he was ready to kill him too if he came in the way of his journey towards upward mobility. So they were very ambivalent characters, and they showed these sides of their personalities. The case for decolonial masculinities. Despite the multifarious genealogy of masculinities of color critique, the deliberate suturing of masculinity to decoloniality remains comparatively recent. Hill Collins and Limail, they wrote books about masculinities of color, Black masculinities, and sexual politics. Was the title of the book by Limail, and similar title was Black masculinities. The title was a book by Hill Collins. And then it was recent Yusupova, she tried to, bring these two concepts together, decoloniality and also masculinity. Diverse temporal and spatial dimensions of masculinity reflect that the discourses of liberation from colonial powers are invariably masculine, which turns out to be an aggressive aggregate of discrete discursive practices. Now we'll see an extract from from a book, The Reluctant Fundamentalist, written by Hussein Hamid, who is a Pakistani writer. This extract from The Reluctant Fundamentalist shows Changez's resistance from the cultural and economic dominance of the West over previously colonized colonies like Pakistan. Whosoever Sufi saints, poets, and conquering kings Changez refers to here are men, and their art and craft is invariably a masculine art. Femininity and gender variance is definitely outside the ambit of the narrative of power, including in egalitarian hierarchies of geopolitical domination. The after effects of colonial situation or neocolonialism keeps burdening the post-colonial masculine subjects like Changez, who resort to narratives of psychological liberation to unburden themselves. The reluctant fundamentalists like Changez view militant organizations like Al-Qaeda and their terrorist attacks a call to decolonize the colonized. So Changez is different from Balram because Balram's struggle is very local. So this is the quote from The White Tiger, and these lines were actually uttered by Balram. If we just juxtapose Changez's decolonizing monologue to Balram's monologue in The White Tiger and embedded Eurocentrism in his novels in The White Tiger, actually, I'm talking about that. In White Tiger's overall masculine discourse becomes very obvious. The extract invariably draws attention towards this embedded Eurocentrism of Balram's outlook. Balram's description of Hindu deities is essentially masculine, a man talking to another man despite being circumscribed within a geographical space dominated by Hindus. Balram, being an outspoken, daring man who refuses to be tamed, refers to the permeating Euro-American narratives of atheism and futility of religiosity. In Eurocentric, epistemic, and aesthetic field, there is a hegemonic control over the production of novel that is self-referential and self-reproductive. Balram does not challenge this control. His masculine identity keeps shifting from being subordinate Indian man to the dominant one. At the same time, he's happy to accept the dominance of the foreigners, both the Chinese and the West. So, Balram's trajectory is a very local trajectory because whatever he says, whatever he thinks about, it is injustices which he observes within India. So if we compare him with Changez's trajectory is more transnational because he keeps moving, from America and to Pakistan. He keeps comparing them, keeps arguing them, keeping in mind both the domains and both the spaces. And as far as Gyan's trajectory is very, very personal. He is more reflective and thinks about himself. Gyan is from the inheritance of loss. So Changez, these are the lines. I mean, they're at the bottom of the slide. They were uttered by Changez. Now, it is next. This is the quote by Gilbert et al., and it is about knowledge system and the trajectories of mass decoloniality. A reader can see how the process of decoloniality brings about an intrinsic enmeshment with Euro-American philosophical inquiries in Changez and the others, which enables them to see through the ways Western regimes of knowledge dominate the peripheral knowledge and renders it to be useless and inferior. Speaking to the American stranger, Changez introducing to him an other episteme characterizing decolonial world making. So he says, for thousands of years ago, we, the people of Indus River Basin, had cities that were laid out on grids and boasted underground sewers, while the ancestors of those who would invade and colonize America were illiterate and barbarian. So he just wanted to show, I mean, his superiority to some extent, that there was a time when we used to be a better civilized people. So in next slide, Changez, in this case of Changez, the reader can observe the delinking from such tradition of Eurocentric thinking when he exclaims these lines shown in this slide. The visible connection of non-hegemonic masculinities to decoloniality reveals the functioning of coloniality of power. To clear space for decolonial masculinities then becomes significant as a collective effort of preparation in plural strategies of resistance to Eurocentric control over masculine conduct. Conflicting decolonial masculinities, bravery versus cowardice. One such example of resistance can be seen in Guyana, who was torn between his masculine performativity as a fighter, a courageous member of GNLF movement, and on the other hand, he knew he was a coward who needed a facade of bravery to camouflage his timidity. Decolonial masculinities like Guyana's imply the struggle for equality and justice culturally, subculturally, and transculturally. Certainly, the encounter between subordinate and dominant masculinity, as observed in Guyana and others, is neither unique nor distinct. The representation portrayal of subordinate and dominant masculinities in Guyana, like other deviant masculinities, is connected with addressing the issues of injustice. If we're applying these ideas on Changez's trajectory, who also exhibits a distinct blend of subordinate and dominant masculinity, the notion of liberation from inequalities and system imbalances of power in the face of rising and resurgent racism, Islamophobia, and far-right constituencies across the world becomes even more prominent. So in slide number 17, Balram's who is from Adija's novel, his trajectory for upward mobility in society is connected on socioeconomic justice, that is co-tangent to political demands of equality, and is part of a wider network of decolonial resistance globally. By positioning himself and other poor boys of India, because he talks about that he and other boys of India in the novel, he doesn't mention other genders and girls and women. He just says he and other boys, like homosexual enactment of masculinities as mentioned by Kimmel. Balram inscribes political demands of the poor alongside those of the Naxals, and in this way goes beyond the colonial masculinity debates. Balram again points out the complicity of poor man of India, who remains trustworthy servants, and thus the capitalists keep thriving at their cost. So these sought outcomes of political demand of justice and equality for the poor servants remains within the scope of an expansive and substantive motion of decolonial transnational masculinities. As Catherine Walsh propounds, it advances radically distinct perspective and positionalities that displays Western rationality of the only framework and possibility of existence, analysis, and thought. Extract 1 here describes the judge as colonial representation who wears a wig and powder and treats the natives high-handedly. It is his dark face which does not gel in with his depiction, which is a marker of his subordinate and marginalized status. Despite remaining within the Western epistemic order, his dark face creates another, thus clearing space for the decolonial option of re-emergence. Unfortunately, not all the colonized men have the capacity to take the track of re-emergence due to total submission to hegemonic colonial order of knowledge or epistemic order. While studying decoloniality in Indo-Pakistani literature has led to study neocolonialism in the literature simultaneously. Neocolonialism poses a resistance to decoloniality's multi-route trajectory and does not let peripheral knowledge be visible by hindering its dissemination, not only in transnational and transdisciplinary locations, but also in regional ones. Here, a reader can observe the domination of foreign language and foreign knowledge in the past colonies, which keeps the neocolonialism in practice. This is an extract from the White Tiger, extract number 6, which is here. This is essentially a masculine monologue where a heteropatriarchal subordinate man, because he's poor, illiterate, and has a low-paid job, is addressing a dominant man, former Chinese Premier Mr. Jiabao. Balram in this line seems to be more interested in asserting a kind of neo-colonial identity than shedding off his former identity as a colonized. He is under awe of foreign books in a foreign language. He still considers English the most superior language, thus showing a disdain for indigenous and native people's books and languages. Why does he address Chinese premier? As he himself said on page 304 of the book, he believes they are going to be the new dominant force of the world. A new kind of soft coloniality is underway. Therefore, Balram declares, my humble prediction, in 20 years' time, it will be just us yellow men and brown men at the top of the pyramid and will rule the whole world. He said that on page number 304. Here we can make a comparison between Adijaz Balram and Hamid Changes, who manifest their respective trajectory of neocoloniality, decoloniality in predominantly masculine world of these novels in distinct ways. Changes' trajectory of decoloniality involves de-racialization of his knowledge through solidarity with the Muslims and more significantly exploration of relationship between critical epistemes of the West. So Changes says to the American stranger, it seems an obvious thing to say, but you should not imagine that we Pakistanis are all potential terrorists, just as we should not imagine that you Americans are all undercover assassins. Because if Americans are in Pakistan, people believe that probably they are spies or they are working for CIA. So this is why he said so. A reader can notice similar patterns in Biju's trajectory of decoloniality from the inheritance of loss. Gradually, Biju develops an alternative knowledge, a kind of critical episteme of the neocolonialism of his time. This is a quote from from the inheritance of loss. The extract in slide 19 shows how Biju unlearns the ideas about immigration to America as a heroic deed and learns how fear of poverty leads the poor of the third world countries to rich countries. This extract provides us an evidence of the development of decolonial senses in Biju, which grew out of uncertainty of the situation and self-reflexivity. Therefore, the trajectory of Biju's decoloniality becomes marked with the uncertainty that it engenders and generates. Examples of the marginalized subordinate masculinity directional ambit of decoloniality incorporates terrains as GNLF movement that arises in his town, terrorist outfits and their terrorist attacks, and entrepreneurship as an endeavor to dominance for the sake of dominance. This sort of activities involved political demands for fairness and equality and represent various forms of ambit of decoloniality, which eventually lead towards critical epistemologies. The lives of subordinate male characters in above-mentioned works of fiction are inherently transnational, and their movements across various boundaries and borders bring them into contact with each other. So, here these are quotes from Inheritance of Loss. Both in the first one, we see some lines about Bose, who is the friend of Judge Patel. It is in the neocolonial scenario as shown in extract here, we can observe shared experiences of inequality and injustice across the generation. So Judge, whatever experiences Bose had when he was in England, his son was having similar experiences. So the same, inequalities, they went on across the generation. It is testimony to strength of these kind of unsuccessful experiences that subordinate and dominated men went on to embark on a journey of decoloniality, which enables them to share knowledge and experience from their particular spatio-temporal domains. So this is the quote from Bacata, which is written over here. One must be cognizant of the fact that marginalized and subordinate masculinities are not fixed and permanent. This status changes as a result of access to and position within structure of power and privilege in prevalent heteropatriarchy. What has been so striking and sad, and yet also inspiring in various accounts of decoloniality, the enduring visceral experience of socioeconomic inequality and injustice, and be accessible and in dialogue with the increasing challenges facing marginalized and dominated masculinity transnationally. As pointed out earlier, it must not be ignored that the relative privilege afforded to some men at a particular spatio-temporal juncture comes with various binds and ethical contradictions. On the one hand, enjoying dominance and privilege at their native town and localities, and yet concurrently underprivileged, labeled as not having been naturalized enough for foreign setting. Through such plurality of experience, Desai, in her novel, seems to reiterate post-colonial Anglophone Indian literature's commitment to produce and archive what Yuvraj et al. Describe as multiple forms of knowledge, including what has been referred to as intangible cultural heritage that we have inherited and evolved through lived experience into contemporary formations and relations. One notable example in this connection is that of Desai's Gyan. Gorkha National Liberation Front, GNLF, a political party in Darjeeling district of West Bengal, India, provides a platform to subordinate men like Gyan to assert their dominance through violence and terror. The moving and intense discourse of resistance and freedom disseminated by GNLF managed to elicit constant interaction, both supportive and challenging for the downtrodden and the underprivileged. The accounts of personal political tensions and violence in terms of spaces like homes, school, elsewhere, showed Gyan to have been constantly marked by radicalized elements. Now I will just move towards some kind of concluding remarks, though there are much more to say, but I just like to end it now. The discussion so far outlined how the process of decoloniality is intertwined with personal, emotional, and political conditions surrounding the subordinate colonized men, as exemplified through the lives and experiences of the fictional male characters. So the decolonial masculinity works within framed, reformed, and redesigned trajectories of knowing, sensing, and doing in a masculine world that is engaged in transnational contexts. Decolonial masculinity then is a politics of seeking gender-based social justice, the masculine praxis of existence in accordance with the notion praxis can be used as denoting the total process and activity by which men in society as subject act upon and change the world as their object. As the notion of masculine praxis can be defined as embarking on the colonial path in the masculine world and in relation to other men. This line of theorizing echoes Kimmel, who suggests that masculinity is best understood as a homosocial enactment undertaken by men for the sake of other men. Decolonial masculinity, without a doubt, is also an enactment of what colonized, marginalized, dominated, subordinate men experienced, endured, and performed. Moreover, different strands of decolonial praxis are overlapping and intertwined. And in the selected works of fiction, decoloniality is closely associated with men and masculinity's trajectories of resistance within colonial matrix of power. This work presents nascent ideas exploring the relationship between masculinity and decoloniality paradigm, which needs to be explored in depth. Modern decoloniality paradigm is expanding in its different dimensions, such as economy, authority, and culture. The main idea of studying literary representation also bring masculine praxis and accretion masculine to light, thus enabling the readers to study gender dimensions of this expansion. The the forces of resistance of the colonized, hegemonized men thus make possible the enactment of resistance, and therefore the expansion of decoloniality, where the fight against decoloniality, modernity of power and repression finds the links with the anti-systemic movements of resistance to neoliberalism. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very rich presentation. I think we have half an hour to discuss. Is that right, John? Yeah. All right. So are there any immediate questions already? Or while people are thinking, maybe I can I can start with my own question. So I have to say that I haven't read the books, but it seems to me from you, what I got from your presentation is that the relationship between decoloniality and masculinity, or if we read those masculinities that you presented from the books as decolonial masculinities, we have to stay in the framework between hegemonic masculinity and subjugated masculinities, or even if it's a fluid masculinity that has some parts that are subjugated and some parts that are dominant or hegemonic, it stays in this bipolar framework of dominance and subjugation, where the dominance and the model is always the white colonial model of masculinity, right? Or am I mistaken in that? But what I was wondering is, are there moments in the books that show forms of masculinity that are more alternative or more critical towards this model of white masculinity that comes with success and dominance, and also violence to other men and women? Are there any moments where we could imagine masculinities that are shaped differently than between those two poles, or not? Maybe this is too much to want. I hope you got my questions, Snobra.
Yeah, I think actually these characters they are I mean on a journey. They start from a point, then they move on, and actually like Balram from the White Tiger, he commits murder, and he is a very violent character, and he is very selfish too, and in order to save his skin, he can kill anyone, even his closest cousin, who he claims, I mean, to love, because he went back despite all the danger that to save his cousin. So these men, there are some. And Chengiz, he thinks, I mean, probably at least he believes that he's successful, and now he is back, and now he is no more, under awe of his. I mean, the people who are superior to him, like American people. So he believes, like, and even Balram, he believes that he has changed his destiny, because from a very poor man, now he's a very successful entrepreneur. He was a very rich man at the end of the book too. But in Kiran Desai's book, though, it was written by a woman, and it is more complex, and it doesn't give categorical answers to many questions. But these two books, the White Tiger and the other one, they are very, I would say, kind of simple, not very complex ideas are there in these two books. Here we can say, I mean, we can observe, though there are some kind of ambiguity there at the end of one book, at least, the Elected Fundamentalists. What happened at the end, we don't know, because suddenly the characters disappears. But still, as far as from his discussion, or from the things that he says, we realize that he believes that now he has actually got his freedom. Now he has got his I mean, his own. He's realized what he is. He has got his own identity and whatsoever. So he comes back, but still, I mean, why is he talking to that American? Why does he need to explain those things to an American? Despite everything, this this, the colonial matrix of power, it never ends, like it has been is mentioned by Mignolo and Walsh. These characters are trying, but they are never truly, get, freedom from these, dilemmas and these inferiority complex, and whatsoever is going on in their mind, it is going to, impact them throughout their life. Judge Patel dies, and still he is not, and he dies an unhappy man. Gayan comes back, but he's an unhappy man. So nobody actually gets perfect freedom or perfect kind of decoloniality is never achieved. If they are in one kind of matrix, then after coming out of it, they're actually in another kind of matrix. So they are actually never free of these things.
Mm-hmm. A little bit depressing.
Yeah,
but thank you for yeah. Right. Do you have any questions? Polly, please.
Polly, I think you're muted. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you. I was just saying that what I want to say is somewhere between a comment and a question. And one of the quotes which really struck me, and you'll be able to tell me which book it was from because I can't remember. Neither you nor I can speak English, but there's certain things that can only be said in English.
The White Tiger.
Okay.
White Tiger by Aravind Adija, yes.
Okay. And I have to say, by the way, that I have read all three of these books.
Okay.
But I read them more than 10 years ago. And, my memory is very vague. It's amazing that I recognized all of these titles. In any case, okay, so as a translator, this was really interesting to me, that this quotation, neither you nor I can speak English.
Yeah.
But there's certain, so are they speaking English between themselves?
Yeah, the book is in English. So Balram is in Indian, and he's talking to Chinese Prime Minister Jiabao. So he's in Chinese. So yeah, Indian and Chinese. He's addressing in Indian. He's writing letters, emails to him.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay. So this, I mean, it's just such a, I don't know what, a poignant phrase somehow. And also the irony is not lost on me that we're all speaking English here, and very few of us have English as our first language. So I'm aware of this, but so to me, this can mean either wait a second now, I had an insight into the significance of this. There are certain things that can only be said in English, meaning that they're completely locked out of they're in this matrix, the colonial matrix of power, and yet they're locked out of the language.
Exactly, because at one point he claims that in future yellow men like you and brown men like us are going to dominate, but still he says that there are certain things which are, they can be said only in English. So he's totally, you are right, he's locked actually in that matrix of power, but he is hopeful in future. We are going to dominate the world, but at this point he's totally in the epistemic control of that English language, and he sees books and he is unable to read them, but still he's awed by them because they are in English, and he is still, though he was an illiterate man, but still he believed that these books have that kind of knowledge and things which are going to dominate. Yeah, he was still he was dominated by them. Yes. And then he and even Indian ways were very
It just says so much about language and power and enforced silence, and I mean there's just so much there that one could think about it for a long time. And then I had one other question.
Yes.
So these masculinities are in reference to one another, right? It's this homosocial world. But what happens to the women? Are they just bracketed out?
Yeah.
Because
in this,
I'm used
Yeah.
to thinking that
Mm.
somehow the identity, the masculinist identity, depends on subordinating, you know, a woman's or female identity, whatever we want to call that.
Yeah. In these books, surprisingly, actually, women are actually their characters are not dominant. They are very small characters. Like in Balram's story, the White Tiger, there is only one woman. She's Pinky Madam, who is his employer, Ashok's wife. But she's there only for a few pages, and then she goes back to England or America. Then there is another character in the other book. There's Erika, who is whose girlfriend of Changes. But I mean, she is also, I mean, there's only one female character in the book. And she doesn't, I mean, he loves her and she does not love him back. And this is also, it creates a kind of othering him in him that I will never be accepted by the Americans. Then he decides to go back. And finally, he gets disillusioned after so many things. The people also say that there's a kind of an allegory, you know, Erika stands for America and Changes stands for Pakistan, and Pakistan and America, they can never have a kind of a love affair. So despite everything, Changes has to go back and Erika never accepts him as a boyfriend. So I mean, so she has a very limited role in the book too, but she's an American and she is not in the trajectory of decoloniality. Yeah. And then in the third book, there is only one character, Sai. Though it's written by a woman, the book, but all the important characters are male. There's only one character, Sai, but she's only an observer, and she is a limited character in the book too. Limited, I mean, she is there, but her role is not that significant. She does not dominate the narrative. She does not, I mean, say those lines that can be quoted like all these men are doing, and the disappointments, men are feeling disappointments, men are disillusioned, men are going to America for a bright future, and men are going to England to study law. Everything is being done by men. Another important character is there in this book, which is Judge's wife, and she was just a kind of, I mean, person. He was just venting his anger out. You know, he was just beating her, and she was so docile, and she finally died. And she couldn't say a word. She represented a typical woman of India who is told, whenever you are married to a man, you are never supposed to come back to your parents. You should die there. No matter whatever happens, you are not supposed to ask for a divorce. But Judge never accepts her because he was totally, I mean, he considered this woman is so inferior because he liked English women and he liked English ways of life. He lived there, and he was so psychologically crushed. He hated everything Indians. He had a dog. He loved only his dog, Mutt, which was a female dog. And this dog also represents English culture because he went there and this English culture was there that he loved the most, and which was represented by that dog that he loved the most. When that dog was kidnapped by the freedom fighters and it was probably killed, they never told what happened to their dog, but it is just implied that maybe the dog was killed. And finally the judge took it to heart and he died. There's only one thing he loved, that was his dog Mutt. He hated his wife and he didn't hate it and didn't love anything in the book. He had only one friend, and he was not very cordial with his friend too.
Is it Mutt with a U, right? Mutt,
M-U,
which is also a very, very disparaging, you know, kind of name, right? It's and very, it says a lot symbolically to.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was a wonderful answer to those.
Thank you so much.
Awkward questions.
No, they were not awkward. I mean, at least you were listening and you liked that quote.
Yeah, it's
certain things which are said to be in English. Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Do you have any other questions? Anybody in the audience? If not, I have another question, if I may. I was also wondering about the function or prominence of religion in the books, and I was wondering if, for example, in the Reluctant Fundamentalist, if religion plays a role and how it is connected to both masculinity and decoloniality, because I mean, we know that often decoloniality is framed through terms of religion. And I was wondering how it features in the books.
Yeah, only in this book, the electoral fundamentalist religion is prominent, because Changes feels that, and instead of his beard, actually, which was noticed by Americans very first. So they don't like him, because when he see a bearded man from Pakistan, they immediately think that he is, I mean, a kind of a terrorist or something. He is not a good man. So then othering happens. Then the September the 11th attacks happened, and he was a kind of satisfied. There is something that brought them down, because he thought that they are so much dominating, and then something must be done. But so it was religion. I mean, it was not that much dominant in the narrative. I mean, it was not because of religion that he decides to come back. But I mean, other thing like racism, this was more, I mean, dominant in the narrative, that he was a Pakistani, but religion was there, but it was a bit secondary thing, secondary to racism. And then after September the 11th attack, then it became a little prominent, because when he grew beard again, and he just made his outlook just like those terrorists, and he then he was, I mean, he lost his job and he became totally disillusioned, and finally he went back to Lahore, Pakistan. But I would not say it was because of religion. He was not a religious man, because he loved Erica, who was an American. He wanted to marry her, but she never accepted him. But actually he was perceived like that as religious, but he was not. So it was a kind of resistance that he was growing that beard. In all three of the three books, religion is not that important. And Balram was making fun of his gods, like they are, I mean, he said that we have 36,000 gods in India, so he was just making fun of it.
I see, thank you.
I think it might be interesting to consider that, first of all, racism grew exponentially after September 11th. Whatever was sort of latent, burst out. And so, and then also the this stereotype or image of a fundamentalist would have been projected automatically on a brown man with a beard.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily a matter of his own attitude toward religion or his religious practices, but what would have been projected, onto him after that sort of watershed moment.
Yeah. Yeah, I was, it just reminds me of the work that Jasper Poir, for example, did. She found out, or she analyzed images, racist images after 9/11 that targeted specifically South Asian men, although, nobody South Asian was involved in the attacks, but for some reason, the image of the Islamic terrorist targeted specifically South Asian men.
Yeah.
Which is, right.
And many Sikhs were attacked as well, just because they wore a turban.
My question about religion was really more about the embrace of religion as something decolonial, as something that questions the colonial matrix and the Judo-Christian connection to it. But it seems that it doesn't feature so prominently in the books, right?
The writers who write English language, they do not, embrace this kind of religious practices, or even not even their characters. But in the other literatures in Pakistan, which are in regional languages, where we see religious practices, and they even keep preaching and preaching people to convert to Islam, but not in English books. They're written by writers who are because they are also writing for English readers. I mean, readers from English, I mean, speaking countries or for international readers. So they don't go for this kind of religiosity in their books, but the people who are writing on the Urdu, they do it, yeah, in Pakistan.
Any other questions? Polly?
I have to always restrain myself from asking questions, but another moment in your talk, you said you talked about epistemic disobedience.
Yeah.
And then there was something about requiring involvement of whole groups and relationality. And I couldn't quite put it together, but it sounded like a hopeful moment to me. Can you recall
epistemic disobedience?
Yeah, and then something about relationality, and so the idea being, I thought, this is the way I took it, that these atomized, like, individual masculinities who are sort of playing off each other and ultimately indulging in this one-upsmanship. The only way out of that is, first of all, epistemic disobedience and forging larger relationalities, but I guess not in the sense of a terrorist network, but in the sense of a solidarity with a community of others. Maybe I'm just fantasizing here, but somehow that was a. Do you recall saying that, or did I invent it?
Yeah, actually, Changiz was trying to convince the American listener, because he was talking to an American, and he was trying to convince him that if you think that you have that dominance on knowledge, because we have our own practices of knowledge, and we have our own history that you don't know. I would educate you. I would tell you what our past practices were.
I see. Yeah.
Yeah, we used to be superior to you. We have that kind of civilization when you didn't have this kind of, advanced civilization. We had, we were that advanced, and at that time you were not. You were barbarians.
Oh, okay.
He said that. Yeah.
So it's like this it's like
Yeah.
delinking, but with the purpose of establishing the same kind of dominance.
Dominance. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a different thing.
You should read history from different perspective. He was just trying to tell him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Polly, for taking interest in it and raising so many points and asking so many questions.
It was really interesting, Snobra.
Thank you so much.
I'll be thinking about it after this too. Okay. And I'll reread all of those books for sure.
Yeah, me
then
too.
we can.
All right. Then I would say, if there are no more questions, we thank Snobra once again for this very interesting presentation.
Thank you so
thank you
much
for the discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us after such a long day of NYI. And yeah, we'll see each other hopefully soon. Have a good evening or have a good day.